All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the presidency of Donald Trump. Our goal here is to take a whole range of sources, everything from really sharp critiques to encyclopedic definitions, and pull them together to build a clear picture of his first term and what some sources are projecting for a potential second one. So, to get started, we're looking at a source that, well, it really doesn't pull any punches. This quote is from a transcript by Robert Reich, and it kind of sets the stage for a pretty detailed list of criticisms against the administration. It's a really useful place to start to understand one major perspective on his time in office. So, first up, let's walk through this escalating list of charges, which we've drawn directly from that critical source. The first point this source makes centers on the pandemic response. It states that by the time Trump left office, about 3,000 Americans were dying from COVID every single day. The source frames this as, and I'm quoting here, a 9/11 scale mass casualty event happening daily. Okay, turning to the economy, that same source highlights a net loss of 2.9 million American jobs during the presidency. In its analysis, it actually calls this the worst jobs record of any president in U.S. history. Next up, on immigration. This source points to the separation of over 5,000 children from their parents at the border, a policy it describes in very stark terms as, quote, putting babies in cages. And the list from this source just keeps going. It details a whole string of other allegations, from a travel ban that targeted Muslim-majority countries to withholding aid from Ukraine, which you'll remember is what triggered his first impeachment. Then, after a public call for China to investigate a rival, he later became the only president ever to be impeached a second time. So, after seeing all those allegations, a pretty big question comes up, right? What are the actual powers of the presidency? Let's turn to some more encyclopedic sources now to really understand the authority that comes with the office itself. Well, standard sources define the president's role in three key ways. They're the head of state, representing the whole nation. They're the head of government, which means running the entire executive branch. And they are the commander-in-chief, with final authority over the military. And this is where we see this fascinating tension in our sources. Because on one hand, you have that formal, constitutional role. But on the other, we have this speculative news report from a TikTok source, which imagines a future scenario in August 2025 where that military power is used right here at home, preparing a quick reaction force for American cities. And beyond the military, a president just wields this immense power. They can veto laws from Congress. They can issue executive orders to create policy basically single-handedly. They can claim privileges to withhold information. These are the very tools that sources point to as being central to the controversies of the Trump presidency, and they really help explain why it's often called one of the most powerful offices in the world. So how did all of this build into something bigger than just one person? Well, academic sources have tried to define the movement that emerged around him, and they gave it a name, Trumpism. So sources define Trumpism as something more than just policy. They describe it as this whole mix of right-wing populism and nationalism, driven by specific ideologies and something they call social emotions. They basically see it as an American version of a global trend. And when you dig a little deeper, our sources break this movement down into a few core components. First, they identified this sense of aggrieved entitlement, a feeling that something has been unfairly taken away. They also point to a focus on what academics call hegemonic masculinity, which ties national strength to a kind of tough, manly bravado. And this is all packaged with this powerful personal branding and a media-savvy rhetoric that's designed to create a direct, emotional bond with followers. So this brings us to our forward-looking sources, the ones that are speculating on what a second Trump term in 2025 could look like, based on the principles of Trumpism we just outlined. One speculative Wikipedia entry from that future time frame lays out a potential cabinet, and it includes some familiar faces like Senator Marco Rubio at State, but also media figures like Fox News contributor Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense and Governor Kristi Noem at Homeland Security. Following that thread, a speculative report from a TikTok news source alleges a series of pretty dramatic actions for a second term. The claims include things like placing Washington, D.C. under military occupation to act as a beacon, setting up citywide checkpoints, and even directing the Smithsonian to align its historical exhibits with his administration's viewpoint. So, you've got these starkly different pictures of the presidency, one of institutional power and another of these alleged authoritarian plans. So how is the public actually reacting to all of this? Let's take a look at some comments we pulled directly from our social media sources. This should give us a raw, kind of unfiltered snapshot of how citizens are responding. The comments that our sources highlight really show a deep sense of alarm. This user, Ober, expresses just total shock at the very idea of a military occupation of our own cities. It shows you just how jarring that concept is for some people.
And then there's this comment from Alejandro S., which voices this intense frustration. This user sees the alleged actions as a slide into dictatorship and is asking why there isn't a stronger institutional check on that kind of power.
And then some reactions move into broader conspiracy theories. This user, Legitimate Biz, suggests these events aren't just random, but are part of a deliberate plot to create widespread financial and social crises. And this is where our sources leave us. We have a presidency that's being viewed through two completely different lenses. On one hand, as a bold use of executive power, and on the other, as a dangerous threat to democracy. The final provocative question that our sources leave us with is this: how does a nation find its future when it can't even agree on its present?